Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining this talk on exploring the pandemic of being a man. Thank you, Network Capital, for creating this platform and giving me the opportunity to talk about this topic, which is really close to my heart. I will maybe give it 10 or 20 more seconds just to let people tune in, and then I'll start talking. So if you're here, um, while we do this for half a minute, the question you can think about is, other than our anatomy and our biology, what differentiates a man from a woman? Or what makes a man, other than biology and anatomy? Good. So for those of you who have just joined, welcome again. And this is a topic that's really close to my heart, and I'll talk more about why that is. The question that we're beginning with, and this is a question that, quite all of a sudden, I found myself thinking about this around 4 years ago now, which is, other than our biology and anatomy, what makes a man a man? Right? And the extension of that question was, if there is something beyond our biology, then all men should share that as an experience. If there is truly something which makes a man. So, it's not a question I have found a concrete answer to. It continues to be something I think about. I'm very curious about, but I have formed some, I've made some headway. I've formed some sort of a hypothesis there. And, of course, on one level, there is no difference between humans, right? Or even I'd make an extension and say between any sort of being. At the end of the day, beneath all the layers of our experiences, this is more in the spiritual realm, we are all pure awareness. We're not defined by our experiences. We are literally just aware that this is happening. But on the human level, it's also true that it is the conditioning, how our minds are conditioned, that are largely behind how we experience this world and how we experience life. Right? So all our beliefs come from our conditioning, all our preferences come from our conditioning, or at least our conditioning largely contributes to our beliefs in the world, our preferences in the world, our opinions, and also what we want and what our aspirations are. And the funny thing is that while we say these are our wants and our aspirations and our wishes, we don't control our conditioning. We have not chosen to be conditioned a certain way. And let's use a few examples to really demonstrate what conditioning is. Okay, so depending on which country and which family we were born in, right? We've grown up all eating different things, and that determines what we end up craving later in life. Now, as all humans, the phenomena of craving is something we all share. The fact that I say craving and you know that craving, what craving is and craving exists, is because you have craving too. But we all crave different things, and what we crave comes from our conditioning. Another example, so say, let's travel back 1,000 years or 2,000 years in time, or even 500 years, 300 years. And say you're sitting with someone from that era, and you place a telephone in front of them. And say this is an old school pre-mobile phone telephone with a receiver, and the telephone's ringing. For you and I, it's very obvious. We're going to pick up the phone and say hello. But this person will look at this object which is making a sound, and they won't know that this has to be lifted. That concept will not exist for them. So that's what conditioning is in very simplistic terms. And before we talk about anything else, I want to say conditioning is normal. There is nothing wrong with conditioning. It's simply how our minds work. And, I'm not a researcher in this field at all, but my understanding is conditioning is also part of how we survive, how we form habits. and how it's an essential thing for us to live and exist on this planet. An extension of conditioning also is identity, right? So we're all conditioned a certain way, and then as humans, we all have a need to belong, to be liked, to be loved. We like to be around people who share the same set of views as us, who have the same conditioning, who have shared experiences, and we form identities. Again, there's nothing wrong with having identities. But the problem, and I think you'll know what I'm talking about, the problems in the world exist when we get attached to our conditioning and to our identities, right? So say I'm someone who craves coffee, and now I say that anyone who craves tea is not a nice person. And of course, this can go to how we identify with our religions, how we identify with our countries. And through my experience, what I've seen in me is the problem happens when I start thinking that my way is the right way. And all of this generally is happening sort of in the background in an autopilot. Usually, we're not aware of how our conditioning is actually behind our opinions and these should, one should be this way, one should do this, one should be this. But once we bring our awareness, of course, that's where some wisdom comes in and we can align with our values and we can choose a response, right? So, like the famous quote that our freedom is in our choice to choose how we respond. So now you may be wondering, why are we talking about conditioning? And the topic of today is masculinity and the pandemic of being a man. Well, it's because as men and as women, and I don't intend to include any other genders here, but for simplicity, I'm just keeping it there. But for men and for women, we've grown up in a world where there are gender stereotypes, there are gender roles, and naturally, those are part of our conditioning. And for some reason, um, it's very curious, it's a mystery. But I think in men, this should around masculinity, what a man should be like, how I should be to be man enough. Somehow, I find through my experience and through the conversations I've had on this with several men and women, that it's much stronger in men, this need for validation about their masculinity. Women have their own share of battle with what is expected of them in society through family, etc. Men have that too, but somehow this insecurity about manliness, I don't find it to the same degree in women. And I have my theories on that, but that's not what this is about. Um, this is, my work where this original inquiry started in me, started from my own focus on personal growth, right? So uh, I want to lead a life with authenticity, and I want to find happiness in the end. I want to find contentment. And what I uncovered was that this trying to be man enough, while on a conscious level I wasn't operating like that at all, but under the layers, beneath the layers, that's what was creating misery. That I was still in my mid 30s, somewhere subconsciously coming from this place of, am I a good enough man? Am I a strong enough man? And that's where this journey started. That's why 4 years ago I was thinking about this question. And let me demonstrate some examples. Right, we talk a lot about toxic masculinity these days, but what I want to demonstrate is that this is not just about toxic masculinity. That most men, in my opinion, and if you're a man listening to this and resonate with this, then that is further validation, do struggle with this notion of, am I man enough? And the extension of that, of course, is, am I worthy? So let's look at an example, and I'll try to use light examples. Okay. So a few years ago, my wife and I stayed at my family's home. We were there for 7 or 8 months. So at night, sometimes in the middle of the night, my dog would come knocking on the door. Okay. And I would get out of bed at like 1 or 2 in the morning, and I would open the door for him. Now, part of me was feeling a bit upset, not because my dog was knocking, but I was upset thinking, why am I always getting up and opening the door? And it wasn't so straightforward for me to just very objectively ask my wife that question. And it took me some time to realize that here actually my conditioning around the role of a husband and what a good husband is like was operating. And the thought of having this conversation with my wife was quite a scary one. To show that a part of me was not okay. Well, not okay is maybe exaggeration, but a part of me wished that she also sometimes got up and opened the door. So that's where the conditioning is. And that's where I realized that if I'm feeling scared, it's because I don't want to be seen a certain way. But once I saw it, I could have that conversation, even though, yes, I did still feel some fear having that conversation. But it was purely coming from my conditioning and thinking that the problem was that even having this wish, I thought was a problem. So, what good husband would even have this wish? And in many ways, I think whatever I was feeling, the sort of slight inner turmoil that this is something I want to talk about, this is not okay with me, those feelings, what typically we turn away from, those feelings were actually my friends here because they were telling me that, hey, there's something you want here. Or they were the ones pointing me to the conditioning that the time had come for me to sort of examine and let go of. And I think some of you, of course, may be wondering that what happened then when I had that conversation with my wife? Did she start opening the door for the dog? And in all honesty, I don't remember what happened. But what I do remember and what's important is that now I'm able to talk about this without any hesitation, really. Right? It's a fun story for me, and I think that's what's important here. The other thing, so I ran my own business for 10 years, and the business still exists. It's an organic food company based in India. I have, over the last few years, taken a bit of a back seat. And I do wonder, how much of my decision to start a business, I started it with very pure intentions, with a strong mission. I really care about what the company stands for. But the fact that I really wanted to start a business, I really wanted that type of success. I think a big part of it was my conditioning around masculinity. And I don't know what decision I may have taken 10 years ago if I was aware of it. But back then, I was not aware that some of my drive was coming from it. And yes, today I'm very grateful for the experiences I've had and the fact that I've started the business. And it's not to say that I did something wrong by not being aware of that conditioning, but it played a role. And I do wonder, had I been aware of this, what would I have done differently? So going back, I just want to make that point again that there's inherently nothing wrong with conditioning, but it's the attachment to the conditioning, to our identities, and operating in those layers of shoulds, those rules. And I think a really good word for these rules is actually called BRULES, B rules. It stands for bullshit rules. Right? So this is how you should be. So going to sort of the stereotypes, boys don't cry, men walk a certain way, men dress a certain way, men talk a certain way. There's a lot of this pressure that men feel in conscious or unconscious ways. But actually, that reminds me that also, I think often our personal relationships are the best mirrors for us to see these things. And that reminds me that until 4 or 5 years ago, if I'd ever have a conflict with my wife and she would ask me, hey, what's going on for you? Right? What are you feeling? What's going on? My response used to be, I feel pressure. And that's the extent of vocabulary I had then. That's the other thing, right? I think somehow the conditioning world over for men encourages men to disconnect from their inner experiences. So a lot of this work, for me at least, has entailed relearning, sort of getting emotionally literate again. So I used to feel pressure. I was like, I don't know, I just feel pressure. And that was that burden of the should, that I need to do this, I need to do this. And somewhere I do feel that there is that, classical conditioning of being the provider that's at play. And I can't undo it, I can't unlearn it without looking at it. Just by saying that I'm someone who believes that men should be allowed to feel and it shouldn't all be on men and all that. It's not going to go away just by quoting a nice moral. I have to look at my experience. I have to understand my conditioning in order to choose how I want to be in alignment with my values. So I think that's the core of my message. Um, and why I call this a pandemic is because I think men world over are suffering. Yes, there are the few who would fall in the umbrella of toxic masculinity. Yes, a lot of problems exist in the world today because of that, but I'll talk about that in a second. But even if we look at guys who are actually nice guys, I think nice guys are also suffering a lot because of these layers of shoulds, because of trying to prove to be a certain way. But the classical things associated with masculinity is strength. And somehow the message we get is strength is to not acknowledge our needs, to not feel. So don't cry, but also don't shout. So somehow, I think a lot of men, I believe that it is those kind of messages which disconnect men from their emotions. And of course, when it comes to personal needs and emotional needs, women have their challenges as well. Women have expectations as well that they have to sort of face. But I think a difference I find is that for women, it's not, and I don't mean to generalize it. Of course, exceptions will always be there, but generally, I do feel that having an emotional need is not a problem for most women. It's okay that I have a need. With men, I feel we see that, oh, we have a need, and it's not okay even to have a need. Why do I have this need? It's not okay to have this need. And that's one thing I see as a problem, as a difference. And and the problem here, I think the data does show us something, is that we can force ourselves, we can trudge along for so long, but at some point, if we're not going to explode, we are going to implode. And some of the data that shows this is that while world over, women are more likely to be diagnosed with depression, and I think women are even more likely to attempt suicide, 3 to 4 times more men die by suicide, depending on the country, but it's 3 to 4 times more. And yeah, there'll be lots of other factors there, but there is a serious problem, I think, when it comes to masculinity in today's world. And having been sort of on this journey for the last few years, trying to understand my own conditioning and trying to also honor who is it that I really am, what are my values, and trying to create my life in accordance with that. Uh, Somehow, a wish also emerged in me that I really want to work with other men in helping them along in their journeys. And the transition I made from being a business owner was to being a coach. And now, as part of my coaching work, I work with other men as well who are interested in that exploration. And strength, that classic male trait, I'd say is, let's think of it this way: is that real strength is in dropping all these concepts around how you should be and actually having the strength to face who you are, regardless of what the world may say you should be. And if you're a man, you're quite likely to roll your eyes at a term like self love. But I think it's all self love. If I don't love myself enough, I will not be able to accept myself or honor what there really is, and I will not be able to be strong. And it's only when I see something about myself can I then choose to respond a certain way. An example is coming to mind, um, which is some time back. I was doing a training, and as part of the certification process, I had to go through a live assessment. Now, it was important to me, right? I really wanted to pass. I wanted the certification. So I was nervous before the live assessment. And the first time I had the assessment, um, it didn't go very well. Right? I was too in my head. I was thinking I needed to be a certain way. So I wasn't flowing with the process. And of course, the people assessing me saw that. And at the end of it, when I reflected, I was like, why was I nervous? I was nervous because I wanted validation, right? I wanted them to tell me, yes, Ashmeet, you are good enough. And it was important for me because if I'm doing this work, I want some seasoned people to tell me, oh, yeah, what you're doing is good. You can actually add value to people. And now here's the thing: I could have pretended. So, one way I could have taken this assessment the next time is that pretend even better. So, just give them what they want to see. And the other was that drop all that and just be yourself and see if they like it. Now, if what I'm looking for is validation, right, this is what really did it for me, is that even if I pretend really well and get their validation, it'll actually never be satisfying because I'll know that who they approved was not really me. What I'm looking for, I will get only when I'm myself and they say, yes, we like that. And tying that to sort of this whole thing of man enough, we can pretend to be a certain way to get approval, say, of a group, validation from others. But our need for belonging, our need for acceptance, which is a core need all of us as human beings have, that need will not be met until we are authentic and we are true to ourselves. Until we are living that way, there will always be a voice inside, a voice in some of resentment, in some of anger, in some of sadness, which is in a way your best friend telling you to wake up and be yourself. So that's my message today. Um, Thank you for joining. I was thinking of what is my intention for what was my intention for today, and it really was for any man or any woman who has joined to just walk away with some curiosity around what is my conditioning, how is that coming in my way, and what do I need to do to live with more authenticity in life so that I can be more fulfilled. And thank you, Network Capital, for this opportunity. I am launching a course. So, this talk really was just an intention uh, to provoke those introspections. But I also want to share that I am launching a course for men on Network Capital. So if the message resonates with you at all, you're welcome. And this is a 6-week program, which is an accelerated journey in order to shed these concepts and find your truth. And The intent is to get a group of up to 30 people who are keen to accelerate their personal growth. So that starts in March, this Monday. And if you've signed up, you'll get an email about this. This Monday, there's an open house to come ask any questions. And I'll be there for an hour or so. And I'm just going to quickly browse through the comments here to see if there were any questions. So there's a question which says, isn't conditioning limiting? And yes, I'd say absolutely conditioning is limiting. And it's when we look at our conditioning and understand our conditioning that we can tune into some limitlessness. It's limiting, but it's also important. That's how we function, I believe, on this planet. Right? We can't live without any preferences. But it's what are my true preferences beyond my conditioning, aligned with my values. And yes, that is the only question I see. If you have any more questions, I'm staying on for a bit. Please ask. And otherwise, see some of you on Monday and maybe in the course. And I do also run a drop-in group every week, and this is a free offering from the heart. So every Friday, there's a drop-in group for any men who are interested in this journey to meet other men. I think we grow and learn really well together in groups, and that's why I offer this group. I think men also suffer from competition, and I think that's a direct consequence of this man enoughness. And that's why I think it's so healing to be in spaces of growth with other men, where from competition, we can move to authenticity and companionship and further our growth. Great. So I don't see any more questions, so I will say goodbye. Thank you for joining, and I hope to see many of you soon.